So our recent World Conference left us with some powerful resolutions that we're still figuring out how to live into. So World Conference Resolution 1325 opens with this: resolve that Community of Christ joins with others in declaring a climate emergency. And World Conference Resolution 1326 opens with resolved because Jesus has declared God's love for all the world and all creation. Community of Christ acknowledges that racism is a sin. Now, last Monday was celebrated as Juneteenth, our most recently declared national holiday. And I'm embarrassed to admit that I really knew nothing about Juneteenth. And it's just been the last couple of years that I've become aware of the significance of the date. And I suspect that for many of us, last Monday passed without any great fanfare or remembrance. I mean, it was Father's Day weekend. Our reunion was going on. We met our new apostle. We bid farewell to a beloved retiree, and we set aside a new mission center president. So it may have just passed us by unless you tried to go to the post office or to the bank. So today, I thought we could explore the connection between Juneteenth and climate. And I won't go over the roots of Juneteenth other than to say that it commemorates the end of overt slavery in the United States. And I say overt because there is ample evidence that racial equality has been an elusive concept for our country. In fact, the story of justice is still being written. So Juneteenth isn't just about history. It should also be a call to action to implement the World Conference resolutions that we just mentioned. So how does Juneteenth intertwine with climate? We can look at cases where environmental injustice is driven by racial injustice. And that spawned the phrase environmental racism. And environmental racism can be in your face, or it can be sneaky and well hidden. So glaring national headlines bring examples to our attention that we can't miss. I'm sure most of us have heard about the lead contamination in the water in Flint, Michigan. And you might even have heard about the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, even the most cynical of us have to entertain the idea that these environmental disasters happened only because Flint and Jackson are predominantly Black communities. These are examples of environmental racism alive and well. And it also tells us we have work to do. However, there are more hidden examples, more institutional examples that some people benefit from at the expense of others. And it's mostly at the expense of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we need to be aware of this. There's a space between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. It's nicknamed Cancer Alley, and it's home to over 200 petrochemical plants that are allowed to spew a noxious cocktail of poisons into the air and into the water. The chemical plants have regular accidents that release even more toxins beyond what their permits allow. Now, this area is over 85% BIPOC, and residents experience cancer, respiratory diseases at rates sometimes up to 50 times higher than that of the national average. Another case of environmental racism, pointing out that we have work to do. In 2008, more than 1 billion gallons of toxic coal ash burst from a holding pond and spilled into the Emory River in Kingston, Tennessee, covering 300 acres with sludge that was full of pollutants like arsenic, mercury, and lead. Kingston is 90% white, and in order to avoid poisoning the residents in Kingston, the Tennessee Valley Authority received approval from the EPA to transport this toxic coal ash waste to a landfill in Uniontown, Alabama. 90% of Uniontown's residents are Black. Now, once the coal ash was in Uniontown, the EPA labeled as non-hazardous, even though it was classified as hazardous when it was in Kingston. Now, the landfill continues to this day to advertise to accept hazardous waste from all over the country, despite continued protests by the city inhabitants. A practice from the 1930s called redlining ensured people of color were kept out of certain parts of a city, and it identified areas they were allowed to move to. If you were Black, Latino, Indigenous, sometimes Asian, the red areas were the only places where you could get a loan to buy a house. So you had to be in the green, blue, or yellow. This policy of racial discrimination was perfectly legal until the 1968 Fair Housing Act. However, shadows of the practice continue till today. And as an example, quite often non-white borrowers generally get charged higher interest rates than white borrowers, even if they have similar credit histories. As the world heats up, temperatures climb, and heat-related illnesses and death affect people least able to mitigate the effects. Heat-related environmental effects continue to haunt redline neighborhoods. Today, those redline neighborhoods are hotter than other areas in the city. An NPR study of 108 urban areas compared redlined areas and those not affected by redlining. And they found that the average high temperatures were up to 13 degrees higher in redlined areas. And urban areas tend to be hotter anyway because of the concrete that stores heat. But the canopy makes a huge difference. The segregated communities tend to have less green space, fewer trees along the streets, and fewer parks. The lingering effects of environmental racism. Oil wells and gas operations have been linked to a growing list of serious health consequences. Birth defects, premature birth, asthma and other respiratory and cardiovascular diseases, cognitive and behavioral problems, and of course, cancer. Oil and gas wells are proven to emit the super pollutant methane, as well as toxic compounds like benzene and xylene, as well as particulate matter. A Yale study in Pennsylvania reported that children living within a mile of an oil well at birth were 3 times more likely to develop leukemia by age 7 than those who did not. A study published in the Journal of Exposure Science examined 33 US cities and found more than 12,000 wells located in redline neighborhoods. And guess what? Los Angeles topped the list with 6,600 of those 12,000 are in Los Angeles's redline neighborhoods. There are double the number of oil wells and gas wells in those redlined areas. And no, that picture on the right isn't the work of an art project. That is an oil well hiding in plain sight. Another case of environmental racism, highlighting that we have work to do. As mentioned, redlining was made illegal in 1968, but it hasn't gone away. Only 5 months ago, City National Bank, based here in Los Angeles, was fined $31 million, a drop in the bucket, for continuing racial disparity in their lending practices. A study from the Yale School of the Environment shows that when corporations violate environmental laws, the fines tend to be lower when the contamination is in communities of color or poor communities. Lower fines result in more pollution, which decreases the property values. And as a result, more polluting industries move into the area, creating a vicious cycle. As an example, last week, the LA County District Attorney announced criminal charges against S&W Atlas Iron and Metal Corporation for disposing of hazardous waste without permit next door to Jordan High School in Watts. The DA's office said soil samples from the high school grounds revealed excessive levels of lead and zinc contamination. One report said that the level was 50 times higher than what the EPA rates as safe on the high school grounds. Also, the students routinely are breathing in dust with lead, chromium, and other toxic materials. Students and parents, residents, activists have tried to call attention to the pollution for years. And before anyone asks, the school was founded there in 1935. The ironworks opened in 1947. So this isn't a case of a school being built next to a toxic site. It might be a good time to revisit the 42nd, 45th verses of Matthew 25. For I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, you did not invite me in. I needed clothes and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, you did not look after me. And they will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison? It did not help you. And he replies, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. So maybe this can be revised. Lord, when did we see you living where the air was unfit to breathe, or the water unfit to drink, or the soil poisonous to touch, and did not help you? How does this affect how we respond to World Conference Resolution 1325 and 1326? A climate emergency and calling out racism as a sin. In response, we might ask how we can combat environmental racism. Well, we can listen and prioritize those living in environmental and justice communities. We've ignored the voices of BIPOC communities for far too long. And when those voices are the ones we should be listening to the most. We must also educate ourselves about the dangers of environmental racism. Not enough of our church members are aware of this problem, and we can't fight against an issue that we don't know exists. Finally, as a faith group, we can donate, we can protest, we can reach out to local government officials. But if we're to honor these two World Conference resolutions, we must not stay silent. We must raise our voices to be part of the change that these resolutions demand. Community of Christ joins with others in declaring a climate emergency, and Community of Christ acknowledges that racism is a sin. We have work to do. Thank you.